Ever wonder what happens when you take perfectly ordinary people and put them in extraordinary situations?
Well, today we're diving into the dark side of science.
We're talking about experiments that pushed the boundaries of ethics and revealed some unsettling truths about human nature.
Buckle up, because we're starting with a real head scratcher. The Stanford Prison Experiment.
Yeah, this one's been the source of so many movies and documentaries.
It all started in 1971 at, you guessed it, Stanford University.
They built a mock prison in the basement of the psychology building.
Right, and recruited a bunch of college students to be either guards or prisoners.
You'd think it would be pretty harmless, right? I mean, it's just role-playing.
That's what everyone thought, including the lead researcher, Philip Zimbardo.
But things went sideways quickly,
Within days, the guards started acting like they were running a real prison,
humiliating the prisoners.
asserting their authority.
And Zimbardo, instead of stopping it, he just let it happen.
It was supposed to last 2 weeks, but they had to shut it down after only 6 days.
6 days.
The psychological toll on the prisoners was too much.
It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What would you have done in that situation? Would you have been able to resist the power of the situation?
And that question of obedience to authority, that's what led to another infamous experiment, the Milgram experiment.
Ah, yes. The one with the electric shocks, right?
Exactly.
That would always send shivers down my spine.
Participants were told they were part of a learning experiment and that they had to deliver electric shocks to another person every time they got an answer wrong.
But here's the catch.
The shocks weren't real.
The whole thing was staged.
But the participants, they didn't know that.
So what happened?
Well, despite hearing what they thought were screams of pain from the other room, most of the participants continued to deliver the shocks.
All because a guy in a lab coat told them to.
It's a chilling example of how easily we can be persuaded to do terrible things when we believe in authority figures in charge.
So we've got the Stanford Prison Experiment showing how easily we can become tyrants, and the Milgram Experiment showing how willingly we'll follow orders, even if it means hurting someone.
And these are just 2 examples.
There's a whole rabbit hole of ethically questionable experiments out there.
Experiments that force us to ask some tough questions about the limits of science and the dark side of human nature.
So stick around as we continue our deep dive into the unsettling world of science gone wrong. All right, so those experiments left us with some pretty unsettling questions about human nature.
But, those were controlled environments, right? Psychology labs, that sort of thing.
So where do we go from here? What happens when these ethical lines get crossed in the real world?
Well, let's talk about a study that's been called one of the most infamous and ethically egregious in the history of medicine.
Oh boy, this is going to be heavy.
The Tuskegee Syphilis Study.
Yeah, I've heard of this one. It's a truly dark chapter in American history.
From 1932 to 1972.
40 years. They ran this study for 40 years.
They did. And it all took place in Macon County, Alabama.
What were they studying?
Syphilis. They wanted to study the natural progression of the disease in African-American men.
But here's the thing about syphilis. It's treatable, right? With penicillin.
Exactly. And that's where the real horror of this study lies.
They withheld treatment, even after penicillin became widely available.
They did. They told the men they were being treated for bad blood, a general term for various ailments.
So the men had no idea they were part of this study.
They were never told they had syphilis, nor were they given informed consent.
So these men, they suffered needlessly for decades.
Many of them did. They experienced blindness, heart problems, mental deterioration, and some even died from the disease.
This is just unconscionable. How could something like this happen?
It's a complicated and tragic story. A story of racism, poverty, and a disregard for human life in the name of science.
And the saddest part is, the damage wasn't limited to those men who participated in the study.
Right. It also had a devastating impact on their families and on the trust between the African-American community and the medical establishment.
A breach of trust that continues to this day.
Exactly. The Tuskegee Syphilis Study is a stark reminder of the importance of informed consent and the ethical treatment of all human beings in the name of scientific research. But unfortunately, as we'll see, it wasn't the only time the lines were blurred.
There were other cases. Other times when people were used as guinea pigs without their knowledge.
Sadly, yes. The allure of scientific advancement, particularly during times of national anxiety, has a way of overshadowing ethical considerations.
Like during the Cold War.
Precisely. The Cold War was a time of intense paranoia and fear, and it led to some truly unsettling experiments, particularly in the realm of radiation.
Radiation experiments during the Cold War. It sounds like something straight out of a spy thriller. What exactly were they doing?
Well, the Cold War was a time of intense scientific and technological competition, right? And both sides, the US and the Soviet Union, were obsessed with harnessing the power of the atom.
Right, the
Yeah.
race to build bigger and better bombs.
Exactly. But that also meant they needed to understand the effects of radiation on the human body.
So what kind of experiments are we talking about here?
Oh, there were a lot of different types of experiments. Some involved injecting people with radioactive substances like plutonium.
Plutonium, seriously.
Yeah, they wanted to see how it moved through the body, how quickly it was eliminated.
And they just injected people with it, without their knowledge or consent.
In many cases, yes. Soldiers, prisoners, hospital patients.
That's horrifying.
There were also experiments where they exposed people to high levels of radiation to study the immediate and long-term effects.
Like the Manhattan Project?
Well, the Manhattan Project was focused on building the bomb itself, but they did conduct some experiments on the effects of radiation on workers. But yeah, during the Cold War, there was a whole other level of experimentation going on.
So what did they learn from all this? Was it worth the ethical cost?
That's a tough question. I mean, some of the research did lead to advancements in our understanding of radiation sickness and cancer treatment.
So some good came out of it.
Potentially. But the way it was done, the secrecy, the disregard for human life, it's hard to justify.
It's a dark chapter in the history of science, that's for sure.
It is. And it serves as a cautionary tale, a reminder that even in the pursuit of scientific progress, we can't afford to lose sight of our humanity.
Well said. And on that sobering note, I want to thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the dark side of science.
It's been a pleasure.
Remember, knowledge is power, but it's up to us to use it wisely and ethically. Until next time, keep exploring, but keep it ethical.